I'd like to welcome you tonight to the meeting. And so feel free to grab a good place to watch and we'll get going here. Welcome. My name is Dave Young. I'm the mayor of Orem, and this is an official city council meeting. And as such, most of our city council members should be here tonight. We'll start out with a prayer and a pledge. And for the prayer, we'll have Stephanie Bisna. If you could please come up and offer the prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for this day and for the many blessings which we've been given here in this country and in this community. We're grateful for our freedoms, for the ability that we have to gather here together and to learn more about how we can serve those around us and to serve the children in our area. We're grateful for those who have provided these freedoms and continue to protect us, and especially those in the military and in our law enforcement. I ask you to watch over them and to bless them with continued strength and continued protection. I ask you to watch over us tonight in this meeting, that we would be able to hear the information that is shared, be able to have an open mind, to be able to process information and be able to make informed decisions for ourselves and for our families. We are again grateful for these freedoms and for these blessings, and we thank thee in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next, I'd like to have Ian Brady, if he'd come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And the audience would please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ian. Well, we should have this about down. This will be our third and final large public meeting before we have the council meeting next Tuesday. Just like the two previous meetings, this third meeting will be recorded and will be online for the public. Our purpose in holding these meetings is to give the public a chance to learn about the results from the study and submit questions they might have. We'll proceed as follows. First, our debt consultants will present a slide presentation discussing the findings of their study. And after their presentation, I'll read questions that have been submitted through the Seed Transparency portal, and our consultants will answer them. So let's begin. First, I'll just do a brief introduction of our consultants. We've got Mr. Michael Wankier, and he's one of the principals for DEC. Michael, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, born in Utah, graduated from Delta High School, so I'm a Central Utah product. I went to Southern Utah University, graduated with a master's degree in accounting. I began my career as an auditor for a public accounting firm, worked in several different places. Since then, over the last 20 years, including working for the Larry H. Miller Group as the CFO in their management company up until the end of 2021. And now I work for Jackson Group Peterbilt.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And next we've got, so Michael's more on the finance side of things as far as the numbers. And then we've got Dr. Paul McCarty. He's been in education for 40 years and received numerous awards. But Paul, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm a product of California. I was born in San Diego, and I went to the University of California, Berkeley for my undergraduate work.
If you could hold the mic a little closer.
Sorry. I'm a product of California. I was born there in San Diego and went to the University of California at Berkeley for my undergraduate, and then did graduate work at St. Mary's. Taught in California for a while, and then came out here to Utah, finished a doctorate, and One of my first jobs here in Utah was as a special ed teacher at Hartfixon School, which is a school for the medically fragile and multiply handicapped in the Granite School District. And I stayed in the Granite School District for 40 years and eventually became a principal and district office administrator. I also did a stint with the Utah Transit Authority. I was vice president of the board of directors, and also I was the director in charge of environmental studies. We did the feasibility studies for the final environmental impact studies and engineering. And also I was involved and responsible for internal audits with UTA.
Okay, thank you. Let's move right into the presentation. And this is the heart of the beast. And this is the third time. So you guys have, yeah, you're very experienced by now. I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay. Oops. We've had the privilege of working with the city of Orem, and as it was explained by Mayor Young, the objective of this comprehensive feasibility study is to determine if the creation of a new school district is financially feasible. And the primary and ultimate purposes of this comprehensive feasibility study is to determine if the creation of a school district would benefit the students, the teachers, and the taxpayers. You can see that we've gone, traditional feasibility studies focus just primarily on the financial. And at the direction of the city council and the mayor, we went a lot further than that. And so some of the direction that we received from the mayor is pretty much summarized in the core beliefs of the city of Orem and the city council, and that is our children are our most precious resource. Our children represent the future of the community, state, and country, and quality education for our children must be one of our highest priorities. And teachers must be paid fairly, and taxpayers must be treated fairly and have a voice in the way that their money is being spent. This is a table of contents. I'm not going to go into each category, but you can see how extensive this was. We had a short period of time. Michael and I dedicated our time to this, and during this time, there was many things that we had to take in consideration. In June, for example, the new budget was released by Alpine School District, so we had to sometimes go back to the table and redo our figures. But we feel at this point that we have a fairly accurate feasibility study to offer to the public. Along that line, when forecasting future property tax revenues, we have followed a process that we've used by the property tax assessors to determine the property tax rate to apply for future years. And we've estimated future expectations, subtracted state, federal, and other local revenues, and then estimated the amount of property tax required to cover remaining expenditures for a new school district. And we can answer pretty much that, is the new school district possibly financially feasible? And we would say yes. One of the things that we have looked at different representation of a local school district versus a more larger school district is a local representation. We looked extensively at 6 city school districts here in Utah. You have Logan, you have Murray, you have Ogden City, you have Provo, you have Park City, and then you have Salt Lake City. And looking at them and talking to them, we got a pretty good idea of what it would be with a local representation. I think the bullet number 2, that all tax revenue would stay in Orem. And then you would have 7 elected board members who would live in Orem and represent local communities. One of the things that, that comes out is that you would have 7 elected, and we emphasize neighborhood city school board members. There's approximately 98,000 people that lived in Orem at this day, and dividing that into 7 would be the representation approximately of how many population each board member would have. Now, there is, even though there's a school district, and this is in the other 6, if Orem becomes a school district, it'd be number 7 in the state. There is a direct separation of Orem City and the council, and then the new city school board members. In other words, the school board is always responsible for the students, not Orem City. And by law, both the school district and the city are separated. But they do have a common interest, and that common interest is the students, especially dealing with their safety and welfare. So you would end up having, and this is what we saw in the other school districts, city school districts, 14 elected community representatives looking after the safety and welfare of students and children in Orem. Now, as we looked at this, something actually did happen that brought this to our attention that is going on right now. One of the things that we looked at in the study, and this slide is going to be repeated as it's going to be part of another scenario, that we found out that in 2006, there was a seismic vulnerability assessment, and it found that 10 schools in Orem had poor or very poor seismic issues. Last February, there was another FEMA study that was released and identified that 3 of those 10 schools are still ranked as very poor, unsafe, in a very poor category as unsafe and remediated. These schools are Sharon Elementary, which is a Title I, Windsor Elementary, which is a Title I, and Orem Junior High, which is a Title I. We noticed that Cascade was also in the 2006, but it was rebuilt in 2020. There was some question as to, that was rated as a poor. The other 3 schools, which were rated for very poor, were not rebuilt. And again, our study is a study of analytics. We report back what is, not necessarily why it is. But very poor rating is, to quote the study, was that it has a high risk of life. Thinking that, would we, any of us here, work in a building that has been deemed unsafe? We probably would not be doing so willingly, but this is where many of our children, and unfortunately, Title I is low-income minority children. So when we had this, and when we presented this to the city council, one of the questions that we got, not only from the city council, but from the community, was, how come Alpine School District has failed to remediate? And then why has Alpine School District remediated newer and less dangerous non-Title I schools? That we didn't pursue, but there are good questions. But the mayor and members of the Orem City Council did ask us for a scenario, a special scenario that will fix the seismic earthquake unsafe issues presently in Orem School. And later on in the slide presentation, we'll show you what is presented as a way to remediate this particular problem.
the next few slides are financial in nature, but this slide is specifically in here to talk about the process that we used to make our estimates. Each year, the school district is responsible for creating a budget for the coming year. That budget gets certified, and once the budget is certified, this process begins. And from that total is deducted federal revenues, state revenues, local revenues, and interest income to then determine the amount of property tax that will be needed to help cover that budget for the year. And so as we've estimated all the property tax numbers in the study, we've used this formula to help us calculate what the total property tax requirement would be, and then we've used that to help determine what the impact would be on an individual taxpayer. Our forecast for 2023 is presented here. On the left is the expenditures. So again, our forecast started with the expenditure side, and we tried to estimate what a budget would look like for a standalone school district. The largest expense by far is salaries and benefits, and the approach that we took with each of the categories in our estimate was to start with what information we had available. Alpine provided a spreadsheet to us that provided per student expense information. We used that information for each of the schools that would remain within the Orem School District or within a proposed new school district. And then we used different inflation factors to grow those numbers over time. The numbers that we used for inflation in general was the consumer price index average for the last 100 years. That ended up being about 3.2% per year that prices or costs would increase. When the proposed budget from Alpine was issued just several weeks ago, they had proposed in their budget an increase higher than that for salaries and benefits for the teachers, for the administrators, and for the support staff. And so we adjusted our forecast to forecast an expenditure of, or an increase of 8% for 2023, an increase of 5%, an additional 5% for 2024, and then the rest of the expenses were increased at that 3.2% average for the remainder of the 10 years that we forecasted. And so you can see we've estimated a total budget of $168.8 million in the three main funds for the district: the general fund, the capital fund, and the debt service fund. On the right, you can see our estimates for the revenues. Again, the federal revenues are calculated on a per student basis, and so we've used the enrollment forecast provided to us by Alpine School District to help us calculate those federal revenues on using that per student number and the forecasted enrollment for each of the schools in Orem. The state revenues are calculated in a similar manner using a per student number that we've used and forecasted based on the most recent information provided by the state. The local revenues and interest income are relatively small. We've forecasted those, growing them at a consistent rate with what has been experienced in the past. And so in the end, we have a total property tax number for 2023 of $62 million. $40.5 million of that goes into the general fund, 3.8 million of that goes into the capital fund, and then 15.7 goes into the debt service fund. And you can see, based on that, our forecast shows total expenditures and total revenues being equal. Consistent with last week, based on the feedback that we received, we've added a few slides. This is a slide that is in the original presentation. It is in our original report, but we had not included it in the slides. And so we've brought it here to kind of show historically what has happened within the Alpine School District. This first chart shows the year-over-year growth in property tax value, or the property tax base. So this is the growth in the value of the property within the Alpine School District. And the bar chart, it's two different shades of blue. Hopefully you can see that. But the top section is the remainder of Alpine, and the bottom section is Orem. And so you can see values have grown consistently over the the 20 years that we looked at, and then we forecasted that the values will continue to grow at a consistent rate into the next 10 years. And they've grown in both the remaining portion of the district that is not Orem, and they've grown in Orem as well. The next slide looks at total property taxes collected each year. And again, you can see a consistent growth. There is a little bit of an up and down around the 2007. From 2008 to 2011, there was a decrease. Obviously, that's related to the recession. But we see property taxes rebounded. And if you look on average, total property taxes each year has increased about 8% over the course of the last 20 years. And so we've continued that trend as we've calculated the increases going into the future. Again, this is a slide that we included in our original presentation. We've included it here to help demonstrate what our forecast is for the revenues going into the general fund. Again, this does not include the federal or the state revenues. We have forecasted those that are included in the forecast that we've created, but you can see the property tax number and the other local revenue numbers growing over time in our forecast. Another key factor for the ability of a new school district to operate is to have a budget for the district overhead. We've estimated in our forecast that there would be $21.6 million available to cover the costs of a district. That comes out to about $1,485, about $1,485 per student. And this is consistent with the amount that's being spent in Alpine right now. And so we've used this number. We believe that it is a number that takes away the risk that things would have to change significantly. We believe that we've provided for enough expense that the district can operate the way that it needs to continue to provide the services and the education necessary for the students in Orem.
The next slide deals with historical Orem and Alpine School District. There has been a question several questions in previous, excuse me, sorry. There has been several questions in previous meetings and at our July 12th presentation to the City Council, and then here and also through the portal about what has Orem done in the sense of helping out the school district, and how much has the school district helped out Orem? First of all, historically, Orem has always been the financial momentum, the force for Alpine School District since its beginning. The district was created in 1915. It had 4,906 students, along with 92 teachers, 21 grade schools, and 4 high schools. Those 4 high schools were Lehigh High School, American Fork High School, Pleasant Grove, and Spencer High School. I don't know if anybody here remembers Spencer High School here in Orem, but that is, for a trivia question, that's your first high school. And since Alpine School District early beginnings, which started 107 years ago, Orem has had a greater property value of all of the 14 cities in Alpine School District for over 100 years. And that continued for 103 of the 107 years. And so Orem has always paid its own way in building its own schools. Let's see, next slide.
This is a slide that was originally created by Alpine School District. We have a similar slide, or a slide that makes the same point that I'll get to in just a minute, but we thought we would include this to help demonstrate maybe a little bit more specifically what we've been talking about. Beginning with the 2001 bond, you can see here the amount of the percentage of the bond debt that Orem has been responsible for, and the percentage of property value, or sorry, excuse me, the bottom line is the percentage of Orem's property value as a percentage of the total property values in Alpine School District. And the second line is the percentage of the bond proceeds that were invested in Orem schools. And so there's a discrepancy that has existed for a period of years and a series of bonds. This is the slide that we presented last week. The gist of it is that Orem, over a almost 20-year period, has contributed 28% of the total property taxes and received 13% of the reinvestment of bond proceeds in the Orem schools, which results in about $130 million of Orem taxes being used throughout the rest of the district and not within the Orem city limits. One of the questions that we were asked was what the impact would be if the proposed $595 million bond was issued. If we use these historical numbers, Orem would be responsible for, on average, 28% of that bond value or the repayment of that debt. With the current values, Orem's property is 19.4% of the district value as a total. And so if we use the 19.4, 116 million of the bond would be required to be paid by Orem taxpayers. And if the 13% reinvestment was consistent, 79 million of that would come back and be reinvested in Orem schools.
This next slide shows that how Orem test scores have had a decline over the years. And the dotted line represents the high school linear, you might say, the graduation rate, which is in a decline. You have the elementary school that has an increase, and then you have the junior high, which hit a dip just before COVID and then has come up a little bit. The concern is the high school that has been going down. And when we look at that whole line regression, it has been declining over the years. Test score analysis, Orem high school test scores are declining compared to the state average. Since 2017, the scores for Orem high schools have dropped 11.2%. And this is from a 47% to a 36%. The Alpine School District's average dropped 2.3% from a 53 to a 51, while the Utah state average increased over 7%. Orem junior or middle school test scores declined. There's a drop of 8.6% from 49 to 40%. Now, the 40th percentile is pretty low to begin with. Orem's middle school scores dropped 6.8%, while the state average dropped a 3.7%. And then Orem elementary school scores since 2017 have increased of over 1%, from 45 to 47%. And Alpine School Districts, the district's elementary score average dropped almost 2%, while the state elementary average dropped 4%, or a little over 4%.
One of the things that we did in the study was try to help a user of the study, a taxpayer, understand what the impact would be to them. And we were asked to look at some different scenarios. Again, we don't know what the future holds, but there are a lot of different scenarios that could happen. These are 6 of the scenarios that we thought of. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the slides on scenarios 1 through 4. We've talked about those in prior meetings. But we'll focus a little bit on scenarios 5 and 6. But for reference, the estimates that we forecast, if there's no split and there's no new bonds issued, would have a member of the Alpine School District, a taxpayer within the Alpine School District with a home worth $450,000, they would pay about $1,591 in property taxes per year. And so each of the scenarios that we've calculated are compared to that baseline, because that's ultimately the difference between no change and what a taxpayer would experience if one of these scenarios were to happen. The fifth scenario that we looked at was if there was a district split and the new school district in Orem issued bonds for $125 million, and the remaining Alpine School District issued bonds for $595 million, which has been proposed. In this case, sorry, there's a typo. That should be $25 million. Wonder, yeah, that top line should be $25 million, not 125. So I apologize. The reason for the 25 would be to account for the repairs necessary to address the remediation in the schools that have FEMA issues still. Paul had mentioned in a slide previously that there's three schools that have continuing issues that need to be resolved with respect to seismic safety. We've estimated this $25 million based on the information that was available in the 2006 FEMA study, and then we've applied inflation factors to those expenses to get to the $25 million. Under this scenario, the new district would be split and their bond would be $25 million, and it would represent a 6.5 increase from the baseline. So an average taxpayer is going to pay 6.5% more in taxes under this scenario to help pay for that $25 million bond, which would then remediate the issues at those schools. In the remainder of the district, under the scenario where a $595 million bond was issued, their taxes would increase from that baseline by about 15.9%. In this case, the 100% of the $25 million bond would remain in the Orem city and area, in the schools in Orem, and the $595 million bond would remain outside of Orem in the remainder of the school district. The next scenario we were asked to calculate was if there was a split, if there was a bond issued for $25 million and an increase to the general fund so that the total amount paid by the taxpayers would be equal to what they would pay if there was no split and the $595 million bond was passed. So there's a lot of elements to this, but the component related to the $25 million bond is the same. The reason that the increase would be in the general fund is because if they were to issue a bond for more than $25 million, those funds would have to stay in the capital fund. They couldn't be used in the general fund to fund ongoing operations of the school district. And so what this would assume is that the general fund would increase and the amount of taxes paid into the general fund would increase, but that additional $4 million per year could be used for the operation of the district, and that would be used at the discretion of the new school board, but it could be used to hire more teachers, to increase support in the classrooms, to increase wages for the existing teachers. There's a lot of things that it could be used for because in the general fund it's not restricted. Again, the impact to the remaining Alpine school district taxpayers would stay the same because under this scenario, they would still be responsible for the full $595 million bond. So I think that's the last slide, and we'll take questions from here.
All right, thank you for that. It's a lot of data, but it's very educational, very informative. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the findings of the study. Now, since the inception of this process, the city has requested questions and comments from parents, voters, teachers, and others to be submitted through our city transparency portal. Of those questions and comments were sent to the consultants. Just to let you know how involved this is and how hard our city staff has been working. To date, there have been 482 questions submitted through the portal. Now, because so many of the questions are duplicates and have been asked multiple times, the total number of questions that have been answered during the previous 2 meetings is 125. The rest of those are primarily duplicates. As we go through tonight's presentation and questions, if you have additional questions that come up that you're just not sure of, you want clarification, I'd invite you to write those down on a 3x5 card. And those 3x5 cards were at the entrance. And then we've got Mike. Well, actually, you've got him right there, but this is Michael raising his hand. And if you want to ask a question, just get the 3x5 card and then give it to Michael. If you raise your hand, he'll come back and get it from you. So tonight, like I said, we've asked 125 questions in the previous meetings. We're doing our best because some people like to go back and look at the different meetings and see what the different questions are. So tonight, first we'll start out by asking the new questions that came in this last week since the last meeting. And then after that, we'll go through some questions that are submitted tonight. And then finally, I was talking with city staff and we decided to do a greatest hits version. So the questions that have been the most popular and the most concerning, they've given those to me and we'll ask those. Now, just for the record, the entire study, so this study, all the previous meetings and the questions are on the Orem Transparency Portal. Now, our only request, the only rule tonight is that you be kind and courteous, and please do not yell from the audience. Now, we'll end this meeting at either 9 o'clock or when we run out of questions. So just starting out, and this does feel like a game show, right? It does to me at this point.
What's the prize at the end?
That's the trick. The first category is study outcomes. There's 10 questions. Study outcomes, and these are the new questions that came in this last week. What would be the advantages and disadvantages of having our own school district? I know that's a broad question.
It's a broad question, and my focus has been to try and stay as neutral as possible. So I've tried to just focus on what the data says. What I would say, if I was going to boil it down, is if you started a new school district, the tax revenues would stay within the Orem community and would be supervised within the Orem community and spent in a way that would be governed by the Orem community. I think if there was not a split and Orem was to remain in the existing district, I think the advantage is everybody knows what to expect and there's no change. The status quo would continue from what it has been recently.
Okay.
From the aspect of more of the educational or the impact on the student and teachers, you would have an opportunity where local representatives who would be in your neighborhood instead of representing 14 cities in the larger school district, but they would be more localized. Issues such as class size, reducing class size, increasing the teachers' salaries and benefits, being more responsive, you might say, to any local or concerns that the parents might have. What we found in the research is that in smaller school districts, the parents and the taxpayers seem to know many times on a first name basis with their, not only their teachers and the principals, but also with the district office staff. So there's more access, you might say.
Okay, thank you. The next question, under study outcomes, why were scenarios number 5 and scenario 6 added to the presentation after the first public meeting?
Well, we added those based on questions from the city council, trying to evaluate what would happen under different scenarios.
Okay. Paul?
Yes, and again, that one slide where I showed the safety and welfare is a concern of the city council, as well as a new school district. And I thought it was a very good example of how the council was very concerned with the status of the FEMA schools and how dangerous they were. And again, as Mike said, we were requested to put in the two slides that would show how the earthquake unsafe schools could possibly be remediated.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Michael did answer that question, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't yell out from the audience, but so, well, okay.
The advantage of staying with Alpine and not splitting is that you know what to expect. There's no change from what you're experiencing now. I haven't looked at it from the standpoint of what's better one way or the other. I've just looked at the numbers to try and determine, does it work financially? And I believe it does.
Okay, excuse me. This is not an open meeting. This is not a yelling meeting. This is not a yelling meeting. We're not going to create this into a mob situation. Thank you. All right, next question. Why are you using seismic data from 2006?
We originally looked at the full study in 2006, but we also obtained the updated study from 2022. So there is recent information about the status of those schools that we looked at.
Okay. The Canyons-Jordan split was a multi-city split. How would a normal split be different as a single city splitting off?
Well, that's true. It was a multi-city. You had 5 cities in the Canyons area, and then you had multiple cities in Jordan. It was the first split in over 100 years, and from that we've learned a lot of lessons, and from that a lot of the lessons learned have turned into Utah code. What was the rest of that question, Mayor?
It was the Canyons-Jordan split was a multi-city split. How would a norm split be different as a single city splitting off?
First of all, it would be a lot more easier, for one thing. One of the largest problems in that split between Canyons and Jordan was the settling of assets. And assets not only represent the physical property or the buildings, but also school buses, other types of equipment, such as computers within the school. This had to be all taken consideration. With the Jordan Canyon split, it lasted almost 2 years until they finally reached a decision. The Utah code now states that if this question of shall Orem form its own school district is on the ballot in November, and if it passes, one of the first things that is done is then the Orem City Council sets up a transition team. This transition team then meets with a transition team, and this is all part of the law, Utah Code 56.3. Then meets with the Orem Alpine transition team, and then they have approximately 8 months to come up with a decision on how all assets are going to be divided, and that deadline is then August 1st of 2023. It's important that assets are determined because that is what the bond indebtedness is based upon, or how much bond of the bond debt Orem would then assume. At this particular point, I believe we're at 19.4% of all the assets in Alpine School District are within Orem. So that would be, if this was August 1st and if the decision was made, then it would be 19.4% of the bond, total bond indebtedness. And that's basically what we've been working on.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question, but this is more of a city council question than a consultant question. It's why is there such a rush to get it on the ballot by this November? Why not give the city council and citizens time to study it out and vote next year? So I think so to answer that question, because I don't think this is a question for you, it's not a part of the study, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to answer questions, but it's in my pile. So when we were elected in January, we had a retreat up in Midway, and we talked about different issues in the city. And one of the issues that came up was the school district and whether or not it was feasible for Orem to have its own school district. Well, we didn't know the answer to that question, but it wasn't like something that had just been thought up. This was discussed in depth back in 2006. It was voted on. It was discussed in depth in 2017. And so it's something that Orem's talked about for a long time. And we felt that what really pushed it for me anyway was the fact that at that point in time, there were rumors that Alpine was going to pass a $400 million bond. That turned out later to be closer to a $600 million bond. And my concern in representing the citizens of Orem was that if they were going to be on the hook for a $600 million bond for their portion, that it had to be something that they were in favor of and that they were benefiting from. And so that's why we decided to do the feasibility study in the first place, was to study that out prior to this bond. And as far as the time frame is pretty much out of our hand. It's if this has to be voted on next Tuesday. So at that point, it will determine if it goes forward or not. But right now, we're just going through the process of gathering as much information as we can to make the decision as to whether or not it should be on the ballot. This is another question. And again, some of these are confidential questions. Some of these are, you don't have to answer, but they're the questions that came in. What did you discuss with Alpine School District and Provo School District in regards to shared service agreements? What were the outcomes of those discussions?
The shared service agreements were one of the areas, and first of all, let me say that shared service agreements are very, very common. For example, anytime that you have an inter-district enrollment where you wish to go into another school district, you are entering a shared, the receiving school district is entering a shared service agreement with the district that's leaving. That shared service agreement focuses on the WPU, which is the state funding that follows the student wherever the student goes, and then the property tax. Currently, the property tax, only 1/2 of the property tax follows the student. The other half is retained by the district. But the law provides that if there is an agreement between the two school districts, that the entire property tax does follow. That's a shared service agreement. We were looking at all kinds of different cost savings and ways in which when we initially forecasted all of the costs, the revenues, and the expenditures that Mike has presented, that was on the basis of full accessibility and full operation and full teacher salaries and benefits exactly as you have right now. And that's what we based the $168 million on. Now, whenever you form a new school district, there's ways in which you could possibly save money. And it could be with a reduction, for example, in district office administrators. Or is there any services that could possibly be shared? And so our what we did is that we talked to different individuals in different neighboring school districts, pretty much from Nebo clear up to Ogden City, to get their insights of how different cost savings could be done. If you look on page 104 in chapter 1.7 in the study, and again, the study is accessible on the Orem website, you'll see the different types of examples that we received from different school districts and ideas. So that was the purpose of cost savings or establishing shared service agreements.
So just to clarify, did you incorporate any of these cost savings into your projections as to whether the project was feasible or not?
No, we didn't.
No.
So these would be potential additional
This is after
programs.
the district is formed, when there is a school board that wishes to pursue this.
Okay, thank you. What's the purpose of presenting 6 scenarios to the public? Do voters get to choose a scenario, or would the new school board do that?
Go ahead.
I think the primary purpose was to answer questions that were posed to us in the process to try and identify what are potential outcomes. Taxpayers and voters would have the opportunity to voice their concerns through the normal political process with the school board to try and find the solution that works best for the schools.
Okay, so your basically role was to show what's feasible.
Yep.
And then it's up to the voters and the school board and the rest to decide which path they want to go down.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to change categories. We've got district finances. Orem will still retain its portion of the old ASD bond debt. Was this extra debt factored into the feasibility study? If not, how would this change the projections in terms of cost to Orem?
Yeah, Orem has a responsibility to repay the debt that exists today, and we have factored that into our forecasts as part of the expenditures that would be required going into the future until those bonds are repaid.
Okay, thank you. Can bond funds be used to build district facilities such as admin buildings, bus depot, et cetera?
I think they can. I didn't look into that specifically, but they can be used for capital projects, and a district building would be a capital project.
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. What year would citizens of Orem vote on new bonds? If the bond passes, how soon can construction begin on these facilities?
Okay. The timeline, as I mentioned, the timeline of setting up the transition team, and then in November of 23, in the general election is when the school board members would be elected and taking office in July 1st. At that particular time, if the different scenarios, first of all, you're not voting on a scenario in November, you're just voting, if it goes on the ballot, shall a new school district be created, period. That's it. Then when the school board members take over in January of 24, that is when the decision, and it's up to them whether or not they want to have a bond, and because on July 1st of 2024 is when the new school district becomes the local education agency, or the LEA. So that decision would be up to the school board.
Okay. What reasons did you find for the disparity between school administrator pay and teacher pay?
We didn't really dig into the whys. We just looked into what's happening based on the numbers and the information provided.
What was the disparity?
I can't remember. We didn't put that slide in this week, but
Let me just have a second here.
And if you don't have it, that's fine.
There was a disparity of approximately $46,000. The largest disparity between teacher and administrators' pay was was Alpine School District of all the different schools that we looked at. And that disparity was approximately $46,000 difference between an administrator's salary in Alpine School District and a teacher's salary. What was interesting, the lowest disparity that we found, and this is all in the report, was in Park City. And Park City was only an $8,000 difference between the teachers and the administrators.
Why does the baseline show an increase in property tax when the Alpine bond is a net zero bond?
I think the net zero is related to the tax rate. And so because property tax values are increasing, the amount of tax that would be paid is a smaller percentage. And so it doesn't increase the percentage of taxes that's being paid, but it requires tax dollars to repay that bond. And so the taxes, the actual dollars paid for taxes have to go up to pay for the bond. The net zero is related to the tax rate that would be calculated based on what the payments are over time.
So I think, because I've got a lot of questions on, had a lot of people question this, but I think what's confusing is it's kind of out there that even if Alpine passes a $600 million bond, that it wouldn't change anything. And so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else has looked at their property tax statements that came out last week, but there's no new bond in our school district, and our property taxes are still going up. So the total dollars that you pay go up based on what the budget is and what the expenditure requirements are for the year, but the rate may change. So my rate went down this year because the value of my property went up, but the total dollars that I'm going to pay for taxes still went up.
Right. No, it is a pretty interesting how it all works. But I think my point is, I've been asked this, is just however the mix is put together with all the different variables of property tax and all the rest, if you borrow $600 million, it has to be paid back. What is Orem City's bond rating, and how could this benefit the new school district?
So I think I misspoke on this when we met a couple of weeks ago, but the way it works for the state of Utah is the state is actually a guarantor, so to speak, for the bonds issued by school districts. And so if Orem was to issue a new bond, they would basically piggyback off of the rating of the state of Utah, and that would allow them to get the highest rating possible from a credit rating standpoint, which would also result in the lowest interest rate possible.
Okay. If Alpine School District did not provide you the financial statements for the schools, I guess they're talking about individual schools. If Alpine School District did not provide you the financial statements for the individual schools, as an auditor, how did you verify how much was actually being sent to and spent at each school? Did they have other records that you could verify?
So we received a spreadsheet that had a per student expenditure number for each of the categories that I presented for each of the schools. And what I did in the absence of a financial statement for each of the individual schools is I compared the total expense for the district from that spreadsheet to the expense from their audited financial statements. And so I got comfortable that all the expenses were in the spreadsheet. If they're categorized improperly or they're assigned to one school instead of another school, I didn't have enough information to try and determine that.
Okay. Has the study determined how many students from Orem are currently enrolled at Dan Peterson for special education services, and what the average cost per pupil of providing those services would be?
So we did not get a breakout of where the students lived. We just got a forecast of the total enrollment for each of the schools. And so in our forecast, we've assumed that the students that go to the Dan Peterson school would continue to go to the Dan Peterson school based on the enrollment forecast that was provided by Alpine. And so the costs to run that school are sitting within the Alpine School District, and those costs include the students from Orem that are attending there. There's mechanisms to ensure that the costs for the Orem students are properly allocated and paid to the Alpine School District, but our forecast was specifically based on where the students are currently attending and the estimated costs to operate those schools.
Okay. Title III funding is designed to improve the education of English learners by helping them learn English and meet challenging state academic content and student academic achievement standards. Did DEC take into consideration the Title III money that Orem receives now from being with ASD?
We didn't get any specific information on Title III, and so if the Title III funding is included in the other numbers that we received, then it would be included, but we didn't get anything specifically talked about Title III. We did get information on Title I, and we've specifically considered Title I in our forecast.
Okay. Does the study provide exact information about teacher pay, hourly pay, and professional development?
We did. The study doesn't have specific per teacher information. We received a file from the state that included each teacher, what they're making in salaries and benefits. And so we factored that into our forecast, but we did not specifically include the per teacher information in the study.
Okay. In the last meeting, DEC mentioned if money was used more efficiently, then more money could be used for teachers. Specifically, how could money be used more efficiently to add teachers and reduce class size?
So we didn't get into that. We mentioned shared services as a potential way to save money, but the purpose of the study was to determine, is it feasible based on what we could see in the data? The determination as to what cost-saving measures would be employed in the future is going to be up to the new school board.
And then also in the introduction of scenario 6, where there would be the extra $4 million, which could be used. Again, this is up to the jurisdiction of the new school board, but it could be used for the increase of teacher salaries and benefits, and also the hiring of new teachers to decrease the class size also.
And I don't know if you have this information, but in that scenario 6, that $4 million, how many teachers would that hire?
It's 60. I mean, that's a low number. You could maybe hire more, but I think you could hire 60 more teachers at the average compensation that Orem teachers are making today.
Okay. All right, we're down to the last category. Logistics. What year would the Orem district start?
The Orem School District would start approximately in July 1st of 2024.
And so what would go on between now and
okay, the steps.
And then...
Okay, well, first of all, there's the November approval of the question to form. Then, as I mentioned before, there would be the transition team, which would be appointed by the city council to start in with the assets and decision on the bond indebtedness, and that could be done by August 1st. Bear in mind also, the law provides a startup monies. Money can be allocated by a loan or directly into the district by the city, and which the law states that the new school district eventually would have to pay back $500,000 of that money in which they receive from the city. Also in Utah Code 53G, the remaining school district, Alpine School District, would then be obligated to give up to $9 million from its general fund to the new school district. Now that $9 million isn't necessarily going to be paid back, but it would be factoring in during the assets negotiation. And then, as I said before, the November of 2023 is when the new school board members would be elected, and then they would take office approximately on July 1st of 2024. And during this time, the transition team, and then it would also, there would be an acting superintendent that could hire who he feels or she feels it needs to be put into the different areas to be able to have everything in line, and concerns, problems that may be coming up can be resolved, so that when the new school board comes on board, things will be pretty much in an operational mode, so that things could be ready for July 1st of 2024, when the new school district would open its doors.
Okay, so essentially in November, it would, if it gets passed, if it gets approved to be on the ballot, and if the citizens decided to do it, that would happen in November. And then, so let's just say the end of 2022. So basically you're about a year and a half from the time it's decided on. before it's
Approximately,
completely
yeah.
operational and happening.
Mhm.
Okay. What is the relationship between the new school board, or what will be the relationship between the new school board and the Orem City Council?
As I said before, in this particular slide right here, is that they're separate entities by law. They're totally separate. And you find this in the other 6 city school districts in Utah. And again, they have a common interest, and that is in students, not in the students' education by Orem, by the council, because that is the jurisdiction and the responsibility of the school board, but anything dealing with safety and welfare. And as I mentioned before, with your interest, Mayor, and also the City Council, to look at the concerns that you saw about the status of the 3 Title I schools that have not been remediated with FEMA issues. You're looking after the safety and the welfare. So that would be the commonality.
Okay, thank you. Is there enough money in the new budget to support hiring more teachers to bring down class size?
I believe that there is, but it will depend on decisions that are made in the future. The $21.6 million budget for a district office, I think, is more than enough. But how much more than enough is really going to be dependent on decisions that are made as far as how big that school district is. Any dollar saved there could be used to hire more teachers to reduce class sizes.
Our districts and teachers define these as classes such as PE and art. You seem to be meaning dual language and accelerated learning. How are you defining, what are you defining as specialty classes?
Well, we're taking the specialty classes, and we have a chapter dedicated to that, because we looked at all the specialty classes of every school district, every school in the district, and there was a disparity that we noticed, that some schools had more specialty classes than others. But taking all of those specialty classes, we factored all of that into the final expenditures for the district, for the new district, so that there would be the same amount of specialty classes, allowing with the concern that all schools would have more equity in the amount of the classes, and that was factored into the budget. Okay, just a second. Let me pull it up here. The specialty classes include art, Chinese, French, Spanish, Portuguese immersion, music, physical ed, science, dance, drama, humanities, fine arts, health, advanced learning labs, science, technology, engineering, and math, which is STEM classes, the Krista McAuliffe Space Center, social emotional wellness, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, which is STEAM, cultural connections, performing, and eclectic arts.
Okay. Is there any way to split the school district without consent of the voters?
No. I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Now we'll move on to the questions. These are the difficult ones because a lot of these wind up being more comments than questions. And so I have to sift through these quickly as I'm trying to figure out the question. But I'll do my best. These are all the questions from tonight. Let's see. Can you give us an example of what remediation will be done for the $25 million at Sharon Elementary, Windsor Elementary, and Orem Junior High? I think they're asking for specific construction projects and the like.
Okay, I don't know.
Right.
That wasn't part of the study. We looked at the fact that there was a study done in 2006 that identified problems. A new school district would have to hire someone to come in and evaluate what needs to be done and bid out what that work would be at that point.
Okay, and maybe
Are they referring to the seismic studies?
yeah, what the question is trying to figure out is specifically what repairs would be done, which I
Okay,
think is
okay.
beyond the scope of what you're talking about.
Yeah, with the
But-
seismic and earth.
But I think what would be meaningful is how you came up with the $25 million, because that's really probably the question is the $25 million that you projected enough to take care of the seismic issues at these schools?
When the seismic issues, and again, you can refer to this online in the different chapters, is that when the seismic team, the FEMA team comes in, they look at different structures and different parts. For example, one particular area that was of concern was the Orem Junior High School gym, and then there was other parts of the school. A school may have just a hallway, or it has an adjacent building or parts in the building. What they're looking for is unreinforced concrete construction or limited concrete reinforced construction. And they have ways to find out whether or not there's enough, for example, enough rebar in it or enough up to seismic standards. And so that particular section, not necessarily the whole school, but that particular section would need to be rebuilt or retrofitted.
As far as your question on the cost, we took the estimates from 2006 and we tried to apply inflation from 2006 to 2022 to try and determine what those estimates in 2006 would be today. And based on that, that's how we came up with the $25 million. But we have not sent experts out to specifically give us an estimate of what the repairs would be. That would have to be done after a new school board was formed.
We greatly encourage the transition team to do that, because having a commercial property assessor going out and looking specifically what it takes would be part of the asset negotiations. For example, if a school is deemed at say a worth of, let's just say, $20 million, but the school was built in the early 70s and it has seismic issues, you need to factor in the cost of repairs of that school, so the asset value then drops. So even though, for example, we're looking at right now 19.4% of all of the assets in Orem, and that's what we based upon our projection and forecasting, it may be even lower than that when you start factoring in the age of the schools and also any type of structural concerns.
And just to follow on that, as far as what you say, when you came up with the $25 million number, that's a conservative projection, a expected number, or an aggressive one?
I think it's,
There was numbers coming, I mean, from the 2006 study, and then we put it more into the 2022 dollars too.
I think 25 is more than what would be needed, but again, we haven't gotten a formal bid. So we've tried to be conservative. We've tried to estimate more than what the actual cost would be, just so that there's not a sticker shock at some point in the future. But we don't know for sure, because there needs to be a specific assessment done with a bid process.
Okay. So this is a fairly involved question, but I think the question is, you're saying that Orem is overpaying or putting more into the bond than they're getting back. So on the capital side, they're putting in more than they're getting back, to the tune of what? Well, I guess it's 120 million over 20 years type thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that in mind, what this person wants to know is, but you're not including what's going on in the general fund, not the capital fund, but the general fund. So the other side of the ledger, are you accounting for that in the context of this excess 120 million?
What we've done, we estimated what the total taxes paid in and the total amount that's come back for the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've pulled that out. So we're specifically looking at allocations to the capital fund. And so no, we did not look at it from that perspective. So we could try and figure that out.
But on a macro basis, as far as the big numbers, that takes into account your general fund, doesn't it? Because isn't that just all the money in, all the money out?
Yeah, I think that question is the contributions to the general fund versus the expenditures from the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that in recent years, specifically in our forecast, we know that there's about $3 million in the general fund for Title I schools that Orem is receiving a benefit. And so there's still a net contributor. Orem historically is still a net contributor. The 130 million is just specifically related to the capital fund.
Okay. And yeah, some of these have been asked and answered lots of times. Would you like to conduct? Okay. I think you know there's been over 400 questions, and we've narrowed it down. You don't sound like, yeah. Yeah, these questions have been asked and answered dozens of times. Okay, let's calm down, and I'm going to do this the way I've done it in the past, which I'm going to go through the questions. I'm going to try and decipher them, and then I'm going to ask the consultants. Any chance you'd like to leave if you're going to continue on like this? Because I really don't appreciate it. Okay, the next question. Alpine School District will be divided sometimes in the next 5 years or so. Would it be better to work cooperatively with the district on that division rather than prematurely pulling out 15,000 students?
That's not part of the study. That's a subjective question that somebody else has to answer.
Okay.
The taxpayers, if it goes to a vote.
So the questions are, so I think if this passes, and no one knows if it will on Tuesday, but if it passes, then there will be another several months to continue delving into these things. But I think what the consultant's job was to figure out if it's feasible, if it's possible. So I'm not going to argue with you about this. I'd appreciate it if you'd stop. But essentially the way this goes is if we vote on it on Tuesday, if it passes, then you will get a vote, I'll get a vote, he'll get a vote, everyone will get a vote as to whether or not this passes. And my expectation is that people would have the judgment to make that decision. And that's what I'm going on. So. Yeah, a lot of these questions are not, I mean, they're good questions, but they're outside the scope of the study. Yeah, these are like guessing. So yeah, most of these questions are editorial, so it's difficult. I mean, you can. Yeah, if you go to the Orem transparency portal, every question that's been asked is on that portal. No, all the questions go on the portal. That's what, if you've followed it, that's where they're at. There's over 400. They will be seen. All of the questions, right? Is that correct, Pete? Yeah, all the questions in all the previous meetings, there were over 400 questions that were asked. There were 125 that we did in this meeting. All 400 of those are on the portal. That's why we have a transparency portal. It's got everything you can imagine about this study. Yep, these in my hand will wind up on the portal. Yep. Thank you. Right, absolutely. I think Pete, we mainly just have the questions, right? And then some of them are answered. Some of them are kind of everyone's editorial kind of thing. Okay, the ones that are answered in the meeting are on there, but all the questions are on there so you can see what's going on. Doesn't Orem have the highest number of Title I schools? How can we stay financially supportive of them if we break away from ASD and the wealthier cities helping to pay for them?
So Orem does have a higher concentration of the Title I schools. We have forecasted that the expenditures in those schools will remain at the current level or higher going into the future. And so the funding to offset what is being lost by separating is coming from the general fund. And that's why there is a slight increase in taxes in our forecast.
Okay. It says your slide shows property values outside of Orem growing faster than property values in Orem. So wouldn't the rest of Alpine district subsidize Orem over time?
I think the property tax values are growing at a faster rate. From a subsidization standpoint, that really depends on how much is spent in the Orem schools and whether the Orem tax base is providing the funds necessary to cover those expenditures.
What is the plan for students who attend Oak Canyon who live in Orem?
The current law right now states that a student and their family have up to 6 years to continue to whatever school they wish to do. There's also the inter-district enrollment and open enrollment from the state that allows students to be able to transfer into one school district or the other. So in this particular scenario, if you're looking at the 6 years, if that means up to 2030, students can still have that opportunity. But let me also say, as I mentioned before, about the shared service agreements when it deals with of enrollment of students who are not residents of a particular school district, that has been going on for years between school districts. So, and again, with the open enrollment now, which is more of a is part of the Utah code, students have the right to be able to go to one district or the other. So what I'm saying with Oak Canyon, there would still be student choice and parent choice of what school they wished their children to go to. As I said before, that's when the interdistrict permits kick in, and also the open enrollment, which is part of the state law in that particular area.
We forecasted based on the school path that the Alpine School District used. So they have a enrollment forecast that's on their website, and it shows each elementary school feeding into a middle school and then feeding into a high school. And so our forecasts are based on that path. And so we've assumed that a student that is scheduled to attend Oak Canyon would continue to stay on that path going into the future.
Where would the new district offices be housed? I think that's outside the scope of the study. And will the school be closed to house the offices? Let's guess. How do you plan to keep teachers, and this is under an assumption, you'll have to decide if the assumption is valid or not. How do you plan to keep teachers who would lose their pensions if we leave ASD?
So any teacher who has a retirement plan through the state of Utah would retain that retirement plan moving to a new district. So I don't think that they're going to lose any pension dollars as a result of a change. We forecasted expenditures as they're currently as Alpine is spending a certain amount per teacher. We forecasted that same amount per teacher grown by inflation going into the future in a new district. So our forecast is structured to treat teachers the same or better going into the future.
What evidence do you have that district size has directly affected test scores, specifically in Orem? What evidence do you have that district size has directly affected test scores, specifically in Orem?
Are you referring to the research that we went through or on this?
Yeah, no, it's.
We just obtained data on test scores. We didn't jump into or research why the results are what they are. We just looked at the data that was provided.
You didn't do like a 2-year study to figure out why the test scores specifically declined?
We did not.
Okay.
Yeah, we weren't given that much time.
Okay, here's a question. How are you going to deal with the Title I funds that Orem currently gets from Alpine that they would potentially not get going forward?
So I think I answered this a little bit earlier. We would increase the general fund to compensate for any subsidy that was lost.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of these are, I mean, I'll give you an example of a question. It's just kind of a, well, I don't know if I even want to go there. Okay. What is the amount of money spent by Orem City to research the district split? You guys, well, you don't have to answer that,
Our contract was for $30,000.
right? In retrospect, were you well paid?
I'm not going to answer that.
Okay. I would say anyone who's going to criticize the amount that Orem spent to research whether or not this is feasible, going after the cost is probably not your best, aspect. There's, I mean, this is like the deal of the century. I'm involved with studies all the time, and a study like this should have cost over $100,000. Have you ever played What If? Where you just kind of ask, what if this, what if that, what if this, what if that? And you just get as bizarre as you possibly can. I'm not going to say anything about it, but this is like playing What If. So I really am trying to sift through these and give you some good questions. Yeah, a number of these have been answered multiple times. This feels like a legally obligated meeting and not addressing Orem citizens' concerns. Are you planning to do what the citizens' families want or what the council wants? Well, if this goes to a vote in November and we don't know if it will or not, then every single person will make that decision. Oh boy. In the paper, it said that when Jordan School District split, property taxes went up over 50% and said it was a big mess. Why is this study so low compared to them? The high school in Orem was named Lincoln, not Spencer. Okay. Yeah, there's so many assumptions here that it's hard to. This is kind of involved. If the vote for a split is successful and ASD issues the bond, how is that distributed before the actual formation of the new school district that could take at least, well, it says it takes a year and a half.
So the proceeds from the bond would go into the capital fund of the district. Where it gets spent from there is up to the school board. So they don't have any plans posted, so we can't comment on where it gets distributed.
Okay. Yeah, this is really, I mean, what would the district overhead management look like? That would be up to the school board, right? Why can we not be told of the disadvantages? Well, there's been over 400 questions asked about the disadvantages, so I think they've been brought up. Well, or you don't like the answers. Can teachers choose which school district they want to be in? if yes, what state code says that? Or do teachers stay with their current school district?
Maybe I can answer that. During the, again, the Jordan Canyon split taught us a lot. And from that, teachers from that found themselves in Jordan had the option of staying found themselves in Canyons, had the option of going back to Jordan. But in reality, there was a lot of teachers that wished to stay. In fact, there was quite a few teachers from Jordan that wished to come over. No teacher is going to be forced to, from that example, no teacher was forced to stay in a place where they really didn't want to. So it was a shift, and there's 2 years when this shifting process can happen. And in the Jordan Canyon split, they only had 18 months, and they resolved the situation.
Yeah, and we have like multiple questions. This is a subjective question. Why an Orem split? Why not look and work with Alpine School District to do with a split with other cities? Where are the district buildings going? Okay. You can either, I mean, if this is easy, go ahead. It's page 115 of the study cites a Stanford study in favor of paying teachers more. Reading that study, the author says districts should increase class sizes and reduce retirement benefits in order to raise salaries. It also says that teachers' pay should be based on test scores. And then, yeah, I mean, it says, do the consultants agree with these policies? But that's definitely outside the scope of the study, unless you want to say something.
I think they're referring to the Stanford University Hoover Institute, the impact of teacher compensation in the 2020. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Says, in addition to reducing the size of the district, research has shown one of the best methods to reverse the decline of student test scores and improve student academic learning is increasing teacher salaries and benefits. Increased teacher salaries has a positive effect and impact upon improved student test scores and student achievement learning, as we had discussed in the executive summary in the beginning of the study. Okay, I referred to the Stanford University study.
Yeah, I mean, the question was does he agree with? Yeah, it's outside the scope of the study. Yeah, could you please acknowledge that many of Orem schools' low academic scores were higher than the state average scores? I think you did acknowledge, if I remember watching, right?
I think we did. I think because in that particular slide.
Yeah.
I can go back to that particular slide.
I think it's okay. You don't need to. You've already done it. We understand that in the second year of forming a new Orem district, teachers who are established would lose their pension. I believe a teacher's pension helps offset a lower than average salary of the tradition of teachers paying for many of their classroom supplies. So where did the scenario where the teachers lose their pensions come in?
if I can understand that right, well, first of all, the teacher's pension, that's the Utah retirement system, and it will not change at all. It was all factored in. And all of the, as Mike said, all the different, all the expenses and supplements, benefits in which the teachers currently have, we factored that into even a possibility of increase too. I'm kind of confused on the question.
But it's based on the premise that teachers would lose their pension in the second year.
Okay.
So if that premise isn't accurate, then it kind
No,
of
that's
complicates the
inaccurate.
question.
Yeah. Mayor, maybe I can also add that, you know, a teacher's salary, that's their property right. And that has been universally respected by Canyons during the split, in which one of the first things that the school board did in Canyons was renegotiate with the association to actually increase the teacher salaries and benefits to what they are now, with the promise from the school board that they would continue to be some of the highest in the state, which they still are. They fulfilled that promise. So again, we factored that in, that the teachers will continue to have all their benefits in place. There won't be any, there will be seamless with the Utah retirement system, with the also forecasting that there will be a definite increase in teachers' pay and benefits.
Okay. I think this is just a clarification question. One slide shows that Orem would save $37 million if it was its own district. I think they're talking about on the bond, right?
That was specifically related to the $595 million bond and the portion of the bond that would not stay in Orem.
Then it says the administration for the new district is 21 million. And then it asks the question, shouldn't that give Orem a 16 million surplus? If so, then why the tax increase? So I think there's some, well, you can answer it, but I mean, it seems like there's some misunderstandings going on as far as how it works.
I think maybe it's mixing two different concepts. We've budgeted for $21.6 million of overhead. That doesn't have to be spent. We've budgeted that based on what's being spent in Alpine now. And so the reason for that was to ensure that we had a sufficient amount of expense in the forecast so that we could have a reasonable estimate of what the cost would be if there was decisions made or ways to save part of that $21.6 million, then the taxes would go down. The $37 million is separate and specifically related to the bond.
Okay. The next one I can't read. A lot has been said about how much ASD admins are paid and the discrepancy between teachers and admin. A new district would need admins. What is the plan to ensure that the new district would pay admins that would want to come or stay in Orem?
I think first of all, in our findings, we found that there was 28 district office administrators at the district office were earning a total of $5.2 million annually. Again, as we said before, one of the largest disparities in Utah between average teacher salary and compared to the average administrator salary was in Alpine School District. The average teacher salary found was $54,965. The average administrator's salary was $101,135, which was a difference of $46,170. And again, the research does show that there's a direct correlation between teacher salaries and student achievement. So the encouragement is, from the study, from our findings, was that if you continue to increase the teacher's salary, your student achievement is going to be going up. And as we use the example of Park City didn't freeze the administrators' salaries, but they had a lower percentage of increase until the teachers became, I think it's only about $6,000 to $8,000 difference. So that could easily be a scenario that the new school district could follow.
So we've budgeted $21.6 million. How that gets spent is going to be the decision of the new district. As far as my opinion, I believe there's enough money there to attract the best administrators that this district would want to hire.
Okay. So to put it in perspective, because, I mean, like I say, this is like playing what if, right? But the big picture that you were paid to figure out was, this is how much money comes in to a school district. This is how much money goes out by Orem citizens. And in the big picture, taking everything into account, all of Alpine's numbers, pensions, bonuses, special classes, everything you can imagine on a macro basis, your conclusion is that it's feasible to do a new school district, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so when we get down into the weeds of, well, what about this person's situation or that person's situation, all those individual situations are taken into account in the overall numbers that you're using to make that determination. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I don't know if you know anything about this or not, but one of Sissy Rasmussen's emails was the updated 2017 study numbers. This document has been received by DEC and shows Orem receives 29 million more than we give to ASD through taxes. Has DEC reviewed this 2017 update in relation to their forecast to funding an Orem-only school district?
We did review it, but our numbers are based on 2021 values. So time has passed since 2017. And so we've used updated information on state allocations, federal allocations, and enrollment to form our opinion based on 2021 numbers.
Okay. This person wants to know, we've talked about this already, so we can skip it if you want, but they said, what is one negative of switching the school districts?
I think that's subjective. I'm not, I don't have a vote. So for me to make an opinion there, I don't think is appropriate.
Okay, I'll answer that since I have a vote. One negative would be change. It would be potentially different, and a lot of people don't like change, and that's fine. But that would be a negative for some people. It would be a change. So there's your one negative. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, we've gone through all these. Is 25 million for seismic issues intended for retrofit or rebuilds? I think you've already answered that. I'm not sure what this is. Is it true that the seismic issue was brought up by board member Wilson? I don't know what that is. Yeah, these are, I mean, they're interesting questions, but they're outside the scope of what you were asked to do. Like I said, you were mainly asked to figure out if it's possible, and there's a lot in the weeds of actual management and oversight of the school district. So with that, we're at 8:52. These I didn't make it through at all. I'm here. Why? Because it's 8:52. And if you like, you can go on the transparency website and you can just read them over and over and over and over and, you know. Okay. You know what? We never even made it to, it's unfortunate. I should have skipped to that quicker. We had the greatest hits, which were good questions that were asked by lots of people, but we're not going to have time to go into those. So as far as where we're at now, the next item on the agenda is on August 2nd, we'll hold a special city council meeting in the city council chambers at 6 p.m. Just as far as general guidelines, so everybody understands what's going on. The city will provide the conference room and library hall for overflow if it's needed. The purpose of that meeting is for the city council to vote on whether or not they will place the question of creating a new Orem school district on the November 22 ballot. This meeting will also provide an opportunity for council to hear public comments. The format will follow the format that we have previously employed. This is a key part. We will permit 90 minutes of public comment, alternating between those in favor and those opposed. Each person will be permitted 2 minutes to make their comment. And if they want to go shorter, that's great. For those who are unable to attend or make public comment, you may email the city council. Now, finally, we are to the end of these public meetings. And I just want to thank Dr. McCarty and Mr. Wankier for all their efforts. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, you've done an amazing job. You've taken a very difficult subject and you wrapped your arms around it from a financial standpoint and an educational standpoint. And you provided a wealth of information. And
thank you.
So I just want to let you know, regardless of some of the feelings, that we really appreciate you coming down and doing this for it. And, you know, I believe you've gone way above and beyond what was expected of you.
Thank you.
And as far as you, the Orem citizens, I want to thank you for your attendance and your participation and your input, as long as it's not yelling out. And I just appreciate that you're involved, and we'll continue down this path, and this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.